name's Callum Cant. I wrote Writing for Deliveroo, which is going to be out in October on Polity Press. Writing for Deliveroo is a book about class struggle in platform capitalism, and I'm a socialist who's kind of interested in understanding precisely what's going on in the crucible of platform capitalism. I wrote the book because a lot of the developments in platform capitalism that we're seeing in terms of how workers are undertaking struggles, how they're confronting their bosses, how they're taking them on, I think really have potential to become significant much more generally. Because at the moment we're in a period of incredibly low struggle. So the working class is basically as disorganised as it's been in recent history. Strike numbers are at an all-time low. We have a relatively advanced parliamentary movement, but then a real problem with the fact on the shop floor, workers tend to still take individual forms of action. They're not collectivising problems, they're not confronting things together. As far as the working class actually exists politically, it primarily exists through the general demands for better wages at the level of politics rather than those demands being enforced at the level of production on the shop floor. So that problem, I think, needs to be rectified by us engaging with the workers' movement and producing kind of a synthesis between socialist politics and the conditions that people are actually facing in everyday life. So whether that be, being underpaid, working in a service sector job, or whether that be, in any other sector of the British economy, we need to interact with that reality and relink those two movements. In the book, I do what Marx called the workers' inquiry. So when Marx did it, it was in 1880, and he was writing, basically, he wanted to know what was going on with the French working class. So he wrote a list of questions that he sent out, and it was basically stuff like, how is your workplace organised? Do you get paid? Have there ever been strikes? What do the bosses do when you complain? This kind of stuff, right? And the point of this was to get into the conditions of people's everyday life and understand them and then articulate them politically, and to form a layer of contact within an industry as well as just having a general overview from the top down. So he really wanted to root politics not only in kind of abstract considerations of what he'd come up with in his head, but actually in the everyday condition of the working class, because he thought that they, the class to who the future belonged, he calls them, understand the conditions best. So a workers' inquiry, the point of it is really to get into that reality. And I think with this book, what I was trying to do is get into one specific sector where we have seen workers are willing to have a fight and see why they're willing to have that fight, what lessons can we learn, and how can we take those lessons elsewhere. So with platform capitalism, we see kind of exploitation at its most brutal, partly because they've got rid of a lot of the mechanisms that tend to produce commitment. So there's this idea in the human relations literature, so this has come up with people like Elton Mayo, they're basically like paid assistants of capitalists, that what you want is for your workers to identify with the company as like a family, right? You want them to form bonds with their bosses, bonds with their co-workers, and see the whole thing as one happy unity, right? Where everyone's collective interests are best served by the profit of the company. Now, that is often linked to structures like official employment and lots of spending time developing a personal relationship. In platform capitalism, you've actually jettisoned these entirely, right? So you don't have a human boss. You've got an algorithm telling you what to do. You feel no commitment to that human boss. And they actually can't supervise you either, so they can't even discipline you. Right, one of the roles of so I've worked in kitchens, right, and in that job, if you started talking about forming a trade union, you get kicked out straight away. There's no chance you keep your job. But in platform capitalism, particularly in food delivery stuff, you're meeting in city centres. Now, there's a thing called a zone centre, right? When you're not doing work, you're sent to these zone centres because they basically want a pool of surplus labour ready to do things whenever, right? So as soon as the number of orders go up, you can go out and do deliveries from all over the place. Now, what happens is these meeting spaces become basically accumulation points where loads of workers, when they're not doing any work, when they're not getting paid, meet and discuss how pissed off they are that they're not doing any work and not getting paid. And that's been created, and it's the perfect environment for you to organise it. So if you are a militant and you're in that circumstances, all it takes is having a few conversations and suddenly, bang, you've got a whole workforce who are well up for it, right? So that possibility is built into the way that these labour processes are structured. So I think rather than just creating a total form of domination where actually workers have no power and they're completely dominated by apps and technology and this premise that these are decentralised workers with no power, in fact, the class relations of capitalism are still the same. In fact, the possibility for resistance is still the same. And as we can see, you're actually more strike prone in some of these industries than you would be in some other retail job. So there's a lot of discussion with good merit about how do we transform the way that we organise workers in a new economic context, right? And people are rightfully very interested in different ways that we can do that. Often this kind of leads to slightly techno-utopian suggestions that we can basically solve everything by inventing the right bit of organising technology, right? I think this is often down to we need an app that can link people up. which can be quite, basically based on the premise that capitalism seems to be using apps, so we probably should as well. The problem really is that you need to think about what exact use case you're going to have for this. Like, what is it going to be useful for? In short, there is no app that will solve everything, but instead, if you want to use technology, you've got to identify what functions you want. So if you want project planning, then you use Trello or Asana. If you want communication across the country, you might use Zoom. If you want cooperative team working, you might use Slack. The challenge isn't that there aren't the technical tools. The problem we're facing isn't one of pure technical lack, like we don't have the right app. The problem's a subjective one, and it's a political one. The problem is that we don't have an organised workers movement capable of taking on defeating bosses in workplaces. That, above anything else, is the problem, and any technical fix is only going to go halfway. And it's the same with politics. There's only, passing laws might do some of this stuff, like definitely getting rid of the Trade Union 2016 Act is important, and the 1992 one as well. We need to get rid of the legislation that basically shackles workers and prevents them from standing up for themselves. But alongside that, if you just repeal that and then nothing happens, if workers don't organise themselves, it doesn't mean shit. There is no solution that doesn't come from workers actually taking on their bosses collectively. So David Graeber has this idea of bullshit jobs, right? That lots of people in the contemporary capitalist economy are caught up doing stuff that doesn't produce any particular use value for anyone. It doesn't appear to be useful in any way at all, in fact. I think with the concept, the only reason anyone gets employed in the private sector is because they're making money for someone else, right? So every job is bullshit in the sense that the only end product of every job is value for the person who's employed you in the first place. But more than that, I think it's a question about, is there fundamentally something in a job that you could, in a different social context, in a different mode of production, use to do something differently? I think with Deliveroo, it might be quite easy to say that it's bullshit, it doesn't do anything, it's just for lazy yuppies in cities ordering sushi to their workplaces. But fundamentally, I think there is a core to it in which the way we think about food is really a way we think about caring for each other. So if you look at Kollontai, right, Alexander Kollontai, and what the Bolsheviks did around the collectivization of kitchens in the immediate post-revolutionary period, they didn't just say that food was, everyone can just make it for themselves, we don't really need to think about how we provide it. They understood that the relationships that we have around food are fundamentally about how we produce ourselves in society. So for me, I talk about platform expropriation, right? About the idea that we want to take over these companies, put them under the control of the workers who actually make them run, be that technical workers in offices or the couriers going on the streets, and start to use them for really valuable purposes. And you should think of that as do you want your granny to be able to get Meals on Wheels, right? Now, Deliveroo riders can do that service. Do you want people with serious mental health problems to be able to access food when they don't feel like they can leave the house? Well, Deliveroo riders can do that service. Do you feel like people who have just had a kid, who are just feeling knackered and aren't sleeping at all, want to be able to get access to food? Well, these platform workers can provide that service. So I think we need to think in a bigger picture about how we expropriate the means of production, the means of food delivery, and put them to collective use. And that has to be part of a bigger program. None of this is just about solving the problems in one sector, it's about solving general social problems. So we need to change the way in which we provide fundamental commodities to people. So at the moment, if you don't have any money, you don't get any food unless there's a food bank there, and that's volunteer based, right? But why don't we have a universal basic food service? And why isn't delivery part of that universal basic food service? So that no one, no matter what happens in your life, ever starves to death. Because in contemporary Britain, one of the richest societies that has ever existed in humanity, people are starving to death because we don't guarantee universal provision of food. Now for me, that's just nonsensical, right? And I think that workers in these industries are starting to understand that there's a political struggle to be had, not only about whether they get paid decent wages and whether they get the right to organise, but also more generally about how we organise our society and how we want to provide for one another and care for one another. Because at the moment, if it doesn't make profit for some dickhead like Will Shue, the CEO of Deliveroo, then it's not going to get done. And that fundamentally is just a terrible way to run a society.